Welcome to another episode of the Life of Elvis podcast. I'm your host, Elvis, and today with me is Whitney Morgan from Arizona, who's an acupuncturist and a functional health coach who works mainly with the Hashimoto disease. So it's going to be a very interesting podcast, which I was very looking forward to. It's going to be a lot about autoimmune disease, which is something that's been on my mind for quite a while now. And I was wanting to get a bit deeper into that. So welcome to on the podcast. Really happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Elvis. Glad to be here.
Right. So before when you first spoke, you told me about your own story and how you suffer from very bad pain due to your own autoimmune disease. So could you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. Well, I think it was 1997 that I was diagnosed with my first autoimmune disease. And then over the following 10 plus years, I wound up getting diagnosed with three more autoimmune diseases.
Hmm.
So, but one in particular was an autoimmune disease of the bladder called interstitial cystitis, which results in pretty constant pain 24/7. It's pretty excruciating. And the doctor at that time told me that there wasn't anything that could be done, and that this wasn't gonna kill me, but I was definitely gonna die with it, and that the pain would get worse. I should probably join a support group. So it was really that moment that I identify as the turning point for me, because up until that time, I had been just seeing specialist after specialist and walking that traditional conventional medicine path. And when he said that to me, I don't know why, but in that moment, I just rejected it. And I knew that I could not invest in his prognosis, that I couldn't imagine my life being like that. So I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew there had to be something different. And that's really what started my investigation into alternative health, naturopathy, and Western nutrition, and then Chinese medicine, and then functional medicine. So I spent a good 7 years or so educating myself and applying everything that I was learning to my health. I ended up really, for all intents and purposes, curing that incredibly painful bladder autoimmune disease. I no longer have any symptoms. Um, and then my other autoimmune issues also started reversing. So one of which is Hashimoto's, which is why I'm very interested in Hashimoto's, because it's so pervasive. At least in the US, it's one of the most common autoimmune diseases out there.
Mm-hmm. And how do you manage to get over this bladder immune disorder?
How did I manage to reverse it?
Yeah.
Well, I started getting treatments, acupuncture treatments at the local clinic, and doing a lot of acupuncture herbs and Chinese medicine. That helped quite a bit. And then when I started seeing the real benefits of that, I decided to go to acupuncture school, and then my study really deepened. Right? I mean, that's when I really started learning a lot about all the possibilities of root cause investigation. And that's really what Chinese medicine is. It's a lot like functional medicine, that they look for the root cause of disease rather than treating the symptoms. So for me, it was a process of changing my diet, changing my lifestyle, cleaning up my environment in terms of chemicals that I might be exposed to, and doing a lot of herbs and stress management. And then eventually, when I was getting involved in functional medicine, I started running a lot of specialized lab tests on myself, and identified some underlying triggers for me, which was gut dysbiosis and leaky gut, and also heavy metal toxicity, and a couple of other things as well. And once I implemented protocols to eliminate those triggers and those really hidden sources of my autoimmune disease, then my healing really progressed. So it's just a combination of Eastern and Western medicine philosophy being applied to my own health.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
As you spoke before, during our first call, these autoimmune diseases are just on a crazy rise these days.
Yeah.
Especially, like you said, around the year 96 or 7, wasn't it?
Yeah. 1996, they really start to go off the charts, at least in the US. Yeah.
Definitely. And along your research, what did you find out? Like you already touched on some of the reasons why you had, your autoimmune disease. What's the root cause of it? Because many times when I hear some doctors speaking about, like you say, it's just treating the symptoms and kind of managing it. Sometimes not, like in your case with your pain. But what's the root cause of it?
Sure. Well, the root cause for every person is going to be a little bit different, but what's important to remember is that it doesn't just happen overnight, right? You have to have certain dominoes lined up that make you susceptible to getting an autoimmune disease. And then there's usually one final thing that kind of pushes you over the edge. So some of the most common triggers are chronic viral infections and gluten sensitivity, and then toxic exposures. So heavy metal toxicity is a big one. That's what I see in my practice. For me personally, the starting point was actually I had celiac disease and I didn't know it. I am a silent celiac, meaning I can consume gluten and I won't have any digestive complaints. So for me, my celiac disease went undiagnosed and unidentified for well over a decade. It was actually the last autoimmune disease that I was diagnosed with. So, but I'd had it for a very long time, and it does so much damage to the gut lining that I really had no way of absorbing nutrients, and my gut was in a chronic state of being very leaky, which allows a lot of things to go through the gut lining into the bloodstream, right? And that's what provokes the immune response. And of course, because celiac disease is caused by gluten, right? Gluten was getting through, not only destroying my gut, but it was getting through the gut lining into the bloodstream and attaching to my thyroid, and causing my immune system to attack my thyroid, or causing my immune system to attack my bladder. So that was one of the main triggers for me. I just didn't know it because most physicians don't even think to screen you for celiac disease unless you present with the classic digestive complaints, which that wasn't true in my case.
Yeah, doctors usually don't ask you about many things and don't think about it. Like we by now we know exactly that there's a constant biofeedback going on between your mind, your feelings, and what was going on in your head and what's going on in your physical body. Yet when you go to the doctors, they never ask you, okay, what's going on in your life? Okay, they just
Rarely.
straight away go into like, here's some pills.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. And unfortunately, with autoimmune disease, at least most of the people that I talk to, my clients, the message that they get from their conventional doctors is, well, we don't really know what causes this, right? It just kind of happens. So it's almost like, well, it's luck, and to a certain extent that can be true, because we do have to have a genetic predisposition, but it's not our genes that really determine whether or not we contract an autoimmune disease. It's how those genes are expressed. So it's really the environment that those genes, have to deal with. And our environment is our food and the toxins we're exposed to and the stressors in our life and the infections, and all of those things affect our genes. So I think the predominant thread of continuity for every person with an autoimmune disease is that, one, you have to have a genetic predisposition, but more importantly, leaky gut is always a player, right? That's always like square one. And then you have to have one final trigger that pushes you over the edge. So if you've got those 3 dominoes lined up, it's very easy to get autoimmune disease. And it's more common in women actually than in men, at least in this country.
Mhm. All right, so let's have a look at that then.
Mhm.
It's quite interesting. So what can cause this leaky gut?
Oh, so many things. Well, the number one thing is gluten. So whether or not you're sensitive to gluten, it causes a leaky gut in everybody every time that you eat it, because gluten increases an enzyme called zonulin within the gut, and zonulin regulates these gateways between the cells of the gut lining. And when zonulin levels go up, those gateways get stuck open, which is what is leaky gut, right? That we have basically holes running through the gut after you consume gluten. And so when that happens, that's just the perfect opportunity for undigested food particles to get through, and then you have an increase in food sensitivities, or for viruses to get through, or toxic chemicals to get through, right? And they go into the bloodstream, or they go into the brain, and they have access to the body now. So gluten is a number one thing. Stress, chronic stress. So just living a stressful lifestyle will give you a leaky gut. So will birth control pills. So many women in this country, they go on birth control pills when they're teenagers and they're on them for 10, 15, 20 years. That will cause a leaky gut plus chronic nutrient deficiencies. So, and then there are other things like bacterial dysbiosis, certain types of pathogenic bacteria or parasites, or yeast infections will make you more prone to leaky gut. And then there are the chemicals like glyphosate. So glyphosate, which in this country is flash dried pretty much across all wheat crops, right? All wheat is treated with glyphosate. You put gluten and glyphosate together, and it's like a super leaky gut formula. It really accentuates the power of gluten in the gut, and glyphosate itself will create a leaky gut. And we're exposed to it all the time. It just permeates our food supply, and it's in the air, it's in the water, right? So I think that's one of the reasons, some people suggest that's one of the reasons why we've seen an increase in autoimmune disease since 1996, because that was really the time period where glyphosate was released in a significant way into our environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we spoke about this before the
Mm-hmm.
podcast. Because as usual, as always, most topics are not always black and white. They're
Yeah.
usually somewhere in middle, in a gray zone. I've heard, for example, this is just an anecdotal, but perhaps there's something behind it. When people from the States go to Europe, they say they think they're gluten intolerant, they can't have any bread in the States. But then they have a croissant somewhere in France and they're just fine with it. What's the difference then? It could be this glyphosate or Roundup, as it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that too. And I think there is some truth to that, that the food supply is just different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also I think there are other variables too. That, if you're eating higher quality food, if you're eating a different type of wheat that's not treated in the same way as it is in the US, you're not going to have the as significant digestive complaints as you do when you eat it in the US. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your immune system isn't feeling that, isn't reacting to the gluten. There's a difference between symptoms that tell you when you get a gluten exposure and a micro exposure. So in my practice, I see a lot of women who'll say, "Oh, I've been gluten free for 5 years. I know that it's not anywhere in my house, and I would know if I ate it because I get this symptom and this symptom." They can list what their triggers are, what their response is to gluten. But when we run the lab works, just to confirm the lab test to confirm that they aren't being exposed to gluten, 9 times out of 10, we find that they are, but those exposures are what I call micro exposures. So they're happening in small amounts and cross contamination, sometimes in their house or sometimes in the restaurant. But the exposures aren't big enough to provoke the symptoms that the women are used to identifying with a gluten exposure, right? But they're still enough to provoke an immune response, meaning you've got elevated antibodies to gluten, you've got a leaky gut, if you have an autoimmune disease, you've got some tissue destruction, your antibody levels go up to your thyroid or to your joints, depending on where your autoimmune disease is located. So you might not feel it in a way that that it happened, but your immune system feels it. So that's why it's super important for anyone who's gluten sensitive and trying to be gluten free to make sure that you test your antibodies at least once a year to make sure that nothing is sneaking through and that you really are successful at avoiding gluten.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've heard there was another thing about this. It also depends where your ancestors come from. Because like people who originate from Europe, I mean, in Europe, we've been using, wheat in one way, in one form or the other. Things like rye, spelt, and these kind of things for millennia. And most of the time, people were just fine with it, more or less, as far as we know. And that's one thing. So, if your heritage is from another place on the planet, in other places they use more corn, rice, or some other grains which don't have gluten in it. So they might be a bit more sensitive to it because of that. And the other thing is that the form of gluten that we eat these days, or form of wheat, is first of all, a lot of the products are just white flour, which is stripped of all the nutrients, everything that's good in the grain, it's gone. It's a different type of wheat than what we used to have, because it's got actually a bit more gluten than it used to have.
That's
so
right.
It's better to make it into a dough and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And plus the glyphosate, and it's usually junk food, isn't it?
Yes.
So that can help.
Yeah.
With the issue.
And our exposure is increased because gluten is in everything, right? So like every processed food or even personal care products, it's just loaded with ingredients that are derived from wheat and gluten. So you're consuming it like in your salad dressing, right? Or things that we don't necessarily associate with wheat and gluten, but it's still there. So the fact that it's so pervasive means that we're kind of getting this constant drip, drip, drip of gluten, which is very different than it used to be like 3 or 4 generations ago. You knew when you ate it, you had a piece of bread or you had a pizza or you had, right? But now that's just everywhere. So the immune system doesn't like that. It doesn't like being bombarded by the same thing over and over and over again, particularly a type of food that's so difficult to digest. And gluten is really hard to digest for everybody.
Interesting. So we said that it was the leaky gut that can cause autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
And what was the next one?
Well, you need some sort of a trigger. So leaky gut sets the stage. But of course, a genetic predisposition is the first thing. And then leaky gut really sets the stage and makes you vulnerable. And then you need some sort of trigger that pushes you over the edge. So for me, it was gluten. For some women, it might be a chronic viral infection, or it might be Giardia, right? Or
hold on, what's that?
Giardia is a parasite, and it's really hard on the gut, and it is a immune provoker, right? So it can be a trigger for autoimmune disease, and so can common viruses like Epstein-Barr, or cytomegalovirus. These are, what we think of as mono, right? Everyone's been exposed to these viruses, but those can be triggers for women as well. So can mercury. And so many of us have amalgam fillings, and those start to degrade. They go into the gut, and that could be the trigger for someone. So, the answer isn't always the same for every woman, but there are some usual suspects that we look at. We look at the gut, we look at toxic burden, we look at chronic viral infections, and we look at food sensitivities. And usually when we run the right labs in those areas, we find more than one root cause. And then the journey begins of eliminating those things, changing the diet, cleaning up the environment, getting the toxins out of the body, or getting rid of the parasite or the virus, whatever's going on.
Mhm. So basically, it's the question of avoiding the triggers.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing, and the other thing is making sure you don't have the leaky gut, right?
That's right. You got to heal and seal the gut.
And how do you do
Absolutely.
that?
Well, the first thing you do is you eliminate things that break down the gut lining. So gluten is one of those things, right? So being gluten-free is one of the best things you can do for gut health. But then there are other things like managing your stress, getting enough sleep, not drinking a lot of alcohol, not eating a lot of processed foods, so eliminating things that we know break down the gut lining or weaken the gut lining. And then there are things like, cleaning up the gut from a bacterial standpoint, because there are certain bacteria that release toxins that will cause a leaky gut.
Mm-hmm.
So we heal it by eliminating things that hurt it. And then we start, reducing inflammation, take some herbs and other nutrients that are known for gut healing properties. They usually promote the mucin layer. They reduce inflammation. They heal the cellular structure. So there are things that we do from a supplement standpoint that will help to heal it. And it can take anywhere from 3 months to a year to heal a leaky gut, depending on the person. But I'd say, if I had to guess, most people in this modern world are walking around with a leaky gut most of the time, just because of modern life and the way that we live and the nature of our food supply.
Yeah, that's pretty bad these days. I mean, most
Mm-hmm.
of the food that you see in the shops, it's those are food like products. It's
Right.
not actual food, isn't
That's
it?
right. It's
Yeah.
not food. It's not food. So always just, walk the perimeter of the grocery store. Don't go down the aisles, right? Just
Yeah.
get the produce and the meat and all of that stuff, whole food. That's what you should focus on.
Yeah.
The
Exactly.
processed food is a real gut killer,
Yeah.
for
Stuff that's
sure.
not made by humans, but
Right.
by nature.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And then avoiding, traditional agriculture, because you want organic, or at least
Mm.
non-GMO. You don't want all of the great whole foods you're eating to be loaded with herbicides and pesticides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is also another thing. I've seen many videos or articles where they say that it doesn't make any difference if you buy organic. And it's kind of misleading, isn't it?
It is misleading. I think, from a standpoint of people, I've read some of those articles too, and they usually focus on like nutritional value of the food and things like that. But it does make a difference in terms of your chemical exposure.
Hmm.
So, and we're all exposed to so many environmental chemicals all the time, and then we don't have control over. So where we can control it, it's important that we do.
Yeah.
Because for every chemical, and this is what's interesting, for all of these chemicals in our environment, well, most of them in the States aren't really studied. It's not like they're proven to be safe. We have very, very bad chemical laws in the US. But when they are studied, they're studied in isolation. They're not studied along with other chemicals, right? And we all have this chemical cocktail in our body. Well, these chemicals interact in a way that they can't really determine, like in a lab, because they have to study them one at a time. So there's just no telling what your toxic burden is doing as opposed to my toxic burden, right? Because we each have our own perfect storm of toxicity. So rather than worry about it, I like to come at it from a place of, hey, let's do what we can to avoid it where we can, like what we eat, what we drink. the kind of personal care products we put on our body, and also what kinds of kitchen supplies we're using, the pots and pans we're cooking in. And, let's clean up our environment that we can control and reduce the exposure to our nervous system, to our liver, to our immune system, so that the other things that we can't control, are a little easier for our body to deal with.
Mm-hmm. What's the role of plastics in all this? Like,
oh yeah, plastics
BPA
are pretty bad.
and all that.
Yeah, and BPA, it's been a big thing for a while, and now BPA free is a big thing, right? So you buy something plastic and it always says BPA free, and people assume that means it's safe. It doesn't really mean that. They replace the BPA with other chemicals that are very similar to BPA. They're just not called BPA, right? So the trouble with plastic is that when it heats up, or when there's any sort of microabrasions and it comes into contact with fat or acid, well, now you've got a situation where the chemicals in the plastic are leaching out of the plastic and into the food that's coming into contact with.
Mm-hmm.
So you think about all of the microwave foods, right, that are held in plastic, and we put them and we heat them up, and
plastic
some of the
balls.
Yeah, that's right. And most of these foods have some sort of like acidic ingredient, maybe tomatoes, or they have cheese and oil. And so fat and acid act on the heat that softens the plastic, and they actually draw the chemicals out of the plastic and into the food. Same is true for your water bottle. Water bottle in a car heats up. Well, just the heat itself will start to leach those chemicals into the water.
Yeah, and these chemicals also disrupt your hormone system.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Big endocrine disruptors, for sure. And for women, that's particularly an issue. And some people think that that's one of the reasons why women are more prone to autoimmune disease, because we have, more nuanced endocrine systems, and we go through significant hormonal changes through our life that men don't go through. So we're more vulnerable. And also we tend to come into contact with more chemicals, at least historically speaking, because of all of the personal care products and the makeup and the hair dye and the fingernail polish and those kinds of things. I mean, that's changing now. Men are catching up with us. They're starting to use a lot more products like that. But historically, we come into contact with about 160 to 180 chemicals just getting ready in the morning, unless you're mindfully purchasing things that are not toxic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even with men, it's not that much better, because some people say that, and it's probably true, that one of the reasons why we have lower sperm counts, our testosterone levels are down, it's because of these because the BPA and these kinds of chemicals, they do kind of work like estrogens,
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. They're estrogen mimickers.
Yeah,
for sure. Absolutely. And then they get part of the problem too, particularly for women, is we tend to store more fat, just biologically. And so a lot of these chemicals are stored in our fat tissue. And then when we lose weight, those chemicals are released into the bloodstream, right? So gaining weight can actually be your body's way of protecting you sometimes from the chemical exposure that you've got going on, because at least it sequesters it and keeps it out of the bloodstream, right? Yeah.
Have you ever came across any correlation between like leaky gut and these environmental toxins and everything in autism? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, did you talk to Zach Bush, or who Zach Bush is?
I've
right?
listened to his podcast.
Yeah. Okay.
Hopefully one day I'm going to get him on the podcast.
Right.
That would be great.
He's a really smart guy.
Yeah.
There are definitely studies regarding leaky gut and autism, leaky gut, and ADD, ADHD, sensory disorders, things like that. And when you really focus on gut healing in children who have these issues, these health issues, you see a lot of symptoms improve. That's pretty common across the board. And Zach Bush has a great product that actually helps to seal up those tight junctions, particularly in the presence of gluten and glyphosate together. And I think he's got some white papers on his product that show that children with autism and sensory issues really tend to get better symptomatically when they take this product 3 times a day, because it encourages all those tight junctions to close again. And if you can keep the tight junctions and any sort of leakiness, if you can seal that gut up throughout the day, then you're going to get less disruptive forces and various compounds going into the bloodstream, which is setting off a cascade of inflammation and symptoms. So yeah, there's definitely a correlation between that. And so many other things. Skin issues are another big issue. So anyone with a skin issue, I always think of the gut. Clean up the gut, the skin usually gets better. The gut and the liver together, but at least in this country, if someone has a skin issue, they go to the dermatologist, and the dermatologist isn't thinking about their gut, right? So they're just saying, oh yeah, you've got this thing on your skin, here's this cream, right? But if you really want to get to the root of it, usually you have to look deeper, and that's the gut and the liver when it comes to the skin.
I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have is the worldview that we have. It is materialistic reductionist view of things. Now, reductionist, what it means is that you're looking at things only as a sum of their parts.
Right.
Like you're saying, the dermatologist don't know much about the gut and all that stuff. It doesn't have to know. It's just about the skin, right?
Right.
But then if you focus just on the part, you then don't see the whole picture, because within the human body, everything is connected.
It's all connected. Yeah.
So you can't really figure out what the issue is.
That's right. Including, like you were talking about, your thoughts and your feelings, your emotions, and your stress level, your nervous system. I mean, that's all connected.
And for that,
too.
we have a different
we have a different thing. Yeah, that's right. A different specialist. That's what really attracted me to Chinese medicine in the beginning, was this philosophy of the symptoms. It's called root branch philosophy, where the symptoms show up in the branches, and a good doctor knows that, yeah, okay, well, the symptoms are there. We might need to prune a little bit here and there, but really to get to what's going on in the branches, you have to look at the soil, right? You got to go into the roots. And if you create health and vitality in the root system, well, then the branches take care of themselves, right? So that really is kind of that is the basis of functional medicine. It's root cause investigation. So Chinese, ancient Chinese doctors were practicing functional medicine because that is the philosophy of Chinese medicine. That's why it's such a nice balance, because I'm trained in modern functional medicine and ancient Chinese medicine. 2 different languages, but they're really saying the same thing. It
sounds like a good combination.
It is. Yeah. It really is. It is.
Yeah, I did look when I was younger. I was reading lots of books and stuff. Basically, through martial arts, I got interested into Qigong, and that's part of traditional Chinese medicine.
Yep.
And like I was saying earlier, that in Western medicine, we always look at the parts and try to solve that one specific thing without looking at the whole picture. They didn't have that over there, whether it's in China or in Ayurveda down in India.
Right.
It's a completely different story. They're looking at a human being as a whole and try to keep the balance of everything in place. So like over here, like I said, over here, it's all just about chemicals, one specific thing for a specific thing, which then causes 10 other problems for which you don't need another.
That's right. That's right.
even more chemicals and stuff, which obviously have their own patents. So big pharma makes a lot of money out of it because
Mm-hmm.
prescribing someone some herbs is probably not going to bring that much money into big pharma. But in
Right.
China in the past, and they still, as far as I know, to this day, they use a combination of Western and traditional
Yeah,
Chinese medicine over there in China,
they
don't
do.
they? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So a doctor in China, especially in the past, many times they would prescribe you exercise to do.
Mm-hmm.
So either some Qigong exercise,
That's right.
diet, herbs. They use, over there they use like literally thousands of mushrooms and different kinds,
Yep.
which are just amazing. And it's just such a big difference to what we have here now.
Absolutely. It's over there. It's a whole body, mind, lifestyle shift, right? So yeah, you might get an herbal formula, but that's not the only thing you're going to get. Like you said, they're going to give you dietary recommendations, things to avoid, and different ways to move the body to manage the flow of chi throughout the body, which is what qigong is all about, right? It's managing your own energetic flow of life force. And if you do that, if you practice qigong every day or tai chi every day, that has an impact on your physical body, and you have healthier tissues, healthier organs, right? Because matter follows energy. And they knew that. They know that, right? So energy management is really kind of at the crux of it all. But here in the West, we don't really think like that. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, I'll manage my energy later. I just need to go, go, go. Right. But yeah, it's very different in the West.
Yeah. And that's why we have so many sick people.
Hmm.
I mean, the way we live over here is just absolutely horrendous and goes totally against nature. And another thing which comes from this materialistic worldview is that we can outsmart nature in a way, whether it's through chemistry or basically through science and technology. But if you look at the past few hundred years, everything about them shows the exact opposite. That we cannot
Right.
outsmart nature.
That's right.
No matter what we do, we can't.
No, we
And
can't. We can't.
even as recently as with these vaccines, for example, against the COVID-19 virus, I've seen literally scientists working for Pfizer saying that the vaccine doesn't work as well as natural immunity because you get an immune response to the spike protein, but then
Right.
that's not the entire virus. It's only like 12%. Now, when
Yeah.
you get the actual infection, you build your own immune response to that thing. You create an immune response to the entire virus, which is more robust, lasts longer. So
Sure.
again, this is the same what I was saying earlier about this reductionist
Yeah.
mindset. Let's
Yeah.
just focus on one thing, and yeah, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the case of vaccines, there's always that realization, though, that yes, your immune system is better if you're fortunate enough to survive the illness, right? I mean, so same as like my mom had polio when she was little.
Hmm.
Um, she survived, obviously, but other people that she knew didn't. Right. So there is that kind of cost benefit analysis that each one of us has to do in cases like that.
Yeah, well, see, it
Um,
depends where in life you're at. I mean, for me,
yes.
for example, someone of my age, of my health, I mean, getting into a car is way more dangerous than getting COVID, for me personally.
Yeah.
You look at the statistics from CDC and it shows like
Right.
it's super low. Obviously,
Yeah.
if you're in your 80s and you got cancer, you got diabetes, and you got I don't know what else, that's a whole different story. I'm
Right.
not downplaying this part of the thing, but
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely. And when you look at in our modern world, when obesity is rampant, diabetes is rampant, right? And so many other comorbidities, well, then you've got significant risk factors going on.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's true. Okay, so back to leaky gut for a
Yeah.
moment. So let's be a bit more specific. So we said that obviously whole foods, no
Yes.
matter whether you're into ketogenic diets, vegan diet, or whatever, we can all agree on the fact that whole foods are the way to go.
Yes.
And you just need to eliminate the junk food out of your diet. That's a
Right.
no-brainer. So out of the whole foods, are there certain foods that are better or worse when it comes to leaky gut?
Yeah, absolutely. So gluten, like I said, causes
Yeah.
leaky gut, so that's not good. Um, but also any foods that are really high in anti-nutrients, phytates and lectins and agglutinins, things like that. So those are your grains and your legumes. So if you're working to heal a leaky gut, then putting a lot of grains and legumes into the gut is not a good idea. It's going to be working against your efforts. So the best thing is stick to vegetables, stick to healthy fats, quality grass-fed wild animal protein, fruits, some nuts and seeds as long as they're soaked and sprouted, which makes them easier on the gut, and bone broth. Bone broth is super, super healing. So I usually recommend that people avoid all grains and legumes while they're healing a gut, just to take that pressure off, right? And then, of course, there's alcohol as well, avoiding alcohol to take the pressure off. Once the gut is healed and sealed, it's possible to reintroduce some grains for sure and legumes, but still we should be preparing them in a more traditional way. So our ancestors would soak and sprout and do all those things, which took a lot of time. We don't do that now. But if we did, it would make those foods much easier for our digestive system to break down and assimilate.
Mhm.
So I recommend everyone get an Instapot. For all my clients, just get an Instapot. And then when you do reintroduce grains and legumes, if you cook them in an Instapot, that breaks down the lectins and the agglutinins and the phytates and things like that, which makes them less destructive for the gut lining.
Yeah, the issue is, for example, for me, I don't eat any meat. I haven't eaten meat for
Hmm.
like over 8 years.
Okay.
I don't eat any animal products. So I can't really get rid of all the legumes out of
Right.
my diet because that's
Right.
main source of my protein, right?
Right.
Together with some nuts. Grains, that's a bit easier, can manage that. But so even if I'm trying to heal it, is it okay to have soaked beans and properly cooked?
Yeah,
Because
I
to
would.
be honest, for me, it's a
Yes.
weird thing not to soak them or anything, you
Yeah.
know, because
Yeah.
that's what I do,
Yeah,
always.
it's for if you're healing the gut and you're vegan, then it's just that much more critical to make sure that you're soaking and pressure cooking your your legumes, because it's really
Hmm.
that pressure cooking that really reduces the phytates and the lectins and the agglutinins and makes it so much easier on your gut. And it's super easy to do, right? I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, an Instapot, they're pretty reasonable, great investment.
yeah. I
And
mean, you soak them overnight. It doesn't take
mhm,
much time to just pour some water over the beans and
right.
let them sit there for a few hours or overnight. And then when you use a pressure cooker, which I used to use in the past,
Yeah,
takes way less time, like a
I
few
know.
minutes to cook them compared to like if you literally just took the soaked beans and tried to cook them in a normal way.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It saves so much time in the kitchen, right? It's
Hmm.
super convenient. Yeah. You can make really great soups and chilies and all kinds of
Yeah,
stuff in really short amount of time. Yeah.
yeah, that's true. I think I need to get one of these.
Yeah.
So what about herbs? Which herbs are really good to have for the for leaky gut?
Well, if you're actively healing and sealing a gut, you're going to want to invest in a gut healing formula of some sort, right? So herbal formulas, most of them have similar ingredients. So things like slippery elm, marshmallow root, aloe, those are pretty common. Licorice root, and then other things like zinc carnosine, L-glutamine. Um, and arabinogalactans, all of these things are usually to be found in a gut healing formula. So I recommend that you get something like that and you take that once or twice a day mixed up in some water. And that gives you just that real nice herbal synergy, right? Because all those herbs kind of work together. And it gives you that real gut healing power, at least a couple of times a day. In addition to that, I really like immunoglobulins. So, but those are animal derived. Right? So colostrum, goat colostrum or cow colostrum. If you're dairy sensitive, you can get colostrum that's or immunoglobulins that are serum derived rather than derived from the milk of the animal. Those are really good for immune modulation because they have IgG, IgA, IgM. You know, they're immune boosters is what they are, and immune modulators. And the majority of our immune system is in our gut. So as we're healing and sealing the gut, we also need to be supporting immune function in the gut because that gives us what we need to, you know, to really fight things that are unhealthy for us that find their way into the gut. Even things like parasites, right? You need a high functioning immune system in your gut if you get exposed to a parasite or some other, you know, pathogenic bacteria.
Do you use medicinal mushrooms for
Yeah.
this purpose?
Oh yeah,
Which
yeah.
ones?
Well, like, oh gosh, so many. Reishi, cordyceps, lion's mane. I usually look at formulas. I usually, you know, shiitake, things like that. There's a great local vendor here in Tucson called the Desert Alchemist, and they put together just the most incredible herbal tinctures that are all pretty much mushroom based with a few adaptogenic herbs here and there, depending on what you're buying it for. But usually when I do consume herbs, I consume them in part of a formula. And they're pretty pervasive in the Chinese medicine formulas because they're so powerful, so medicinal.
Mm-hmm. What about any vitamin or mineral supplements that could be helpful?
For gut healing specifically? Well, like I said, L-glutamine is really important. And usually somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 milligrams a couple of times a day. And that's usually part of a gut healing formula, a supplement. It's usually in the formula. Zinc carnosine is another thing that's important. Also glutathione. Glutathione is gut healing as well. It's our major antioxidant that our body produces, but a lot of people are deficient. So it can be really helpful to take glutathione when you're trying to heal the gut.
I suppose then NAC is also pretty good for this.
Yeah. N-acetylcysteine is it's a precursor to glutathione.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely there's a host of amino acids that are good for gut healing for sure. And that's another thing that you can do is you know, get a high quality amino acid formula powder and make that part of your gut healing cocktail. You know, usually there's two or three things that I usually put together for clients. One is a traditional gut healing formula with all of the herbs and things in it. And then the other is an immune booster, like the serum derived immunoglobulins. And then we can do some additional gut healing with bone broth powder, collagen peptides, those kinds of things, because they contain those amino acids. Or we just do a free flow amino acid formula. And if you put all these things together in a little bit of water, I mean, you have your gut healing cocktail right there.
It's pretty interesting.
And then there are other things that are really important, like getting enough sleep.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you can be taking all the supplements that you can to heal your gut, but if you're staying up until 2:00 in the morning, you know, streaming on Netflix or scrolling through Instagram, it's going to be really hard to heal your gut. That's a big deal, right? So making sure that you're getting to bed by like 10 or 11 at night, you're getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. That's super important. Also managing your stress, you know, doing something every day to shift that nervous system back into parasympathetic mode is very important, because if you're not in parasympathetic mode, if we're spending all of our time in fight or flight, which is very common in the modern world, then that takes up all of our resources. We don't have any resources to heal and seal and, repair cells and rebuild the body, because everything is taken up by this fight or flight need. So just doing something mindfully to shift back into parasympathetic mode is super important. So things like meditation or tapping or coloring, just coloring book before you go to bed, or journaling, or a nice long bath in Epsom salts. There's so many different ways that we can calm our nervous system down and shift back into that calm mode. We just need to practice doing it every day.
Mhm. Yeah, it's all about consistency at the end,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and Qigong, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Right? You practice Qigong
Yeah.
every day. I mean,
Or yoga.
or yoga. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good point. Yeah, with the fight or flight mode.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a great invention of evolution for us to have it, but
Yep.
we were never supposed to be in it 24/7.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
it's a
right.
big difference. And if you're in this fight or flight mode, it's like the state when you have to fight a bear in woods or something,
Yeah.
and your body's not going to be thinking about cleaning up your joints or whatever.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right. Because
it
it's not a
shuts
time.
down your immune system as well, doesn't it?
It does. Shuts down your
Yeah.
immune system, shuts down your digestion, all that like infrastructure repair stuff, right? It just kind of goes offline because it's not a time to focus in infrastructure and repairing, because your nervous system thinks it's in danger and it's just trying to survive,
Yeah.
right? Even though you're not being chased by a lion, but your nervous system doesn't know that. Right. So it just behaves when it gets that adrenaline, it gets that cortisol, and it shifts into that sympathetic mode. It does whatever it needs to do to make sure you survive. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
So we just said that obviously there's a correlation between stress, which is psychological,
Hmm.
can be psychological. It doesn't
Hmm.
always have to be. Even eating junk food is a form of stress for the body, isn't it?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because very taxing in every way. What about other psychological issues which could trigger these things, like for example, certain traumas or
Oh, yeah.
stuff like that? Have you seen that in
Yeah.
working with clients?
Trauma is a big deal. Trauma gets stored in the tissues. It gets stored in the body. And, we see this a lot. Well, I see it a lot in my female clients, but it's not unique to women, right? So there's a lot of trauma, men and women. Um, but probably one of the most well-known or well-studied traumas is PTSD, right? So that gets stored in the body, and then anything can trigger it. Usually it's depending upon an experience, or right, that something happens throughout your day, and then boom, something triggers you, and you may not even know it, but your body shifts into what's called activation. So for some people with trauma, they know when they're triggered. Other people with trauma, they don't really know, because they kind of walk around in this state of hyperactivation that to them feels normal, but it's not. It's not a place of rest. It's not a place of calm, but it's very difficult to be aware of it when you're in it, right? So when you're activated due to trauma, that leaves you so vulnerable to illness and disease, and right, because all of that is in the tissues, it's in the body. So there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, I
Mhm.
think. Really, really good read, and it's about that. It's about that concept of, it is the body that manifests our emotional, psycho spiritual life, right? It's like all that information gets encoded. So for one person, it can show up as chronic back pain, right? For another person, it can show up as migraines, or maybe autoimmune disease, right? So part of, I mean, working with trauma is out of the scope of my practice, but I will often refer people to different trauma work applications, right? So somatic experience therapy is a great way to have someone help you kind of reintegrate that trauma. But then there are other things too, like traumatic release exercises, which you can learn how to do, and you can do them at home. And it's really kind of cool. It's using the body to release the trauma through shaking, because that's how animals do it in the
Hmm.
wild, and that's how we do it as little kids. When we're scared, when we're traumatized, we shiver, we shake, right? Well, animals do that all the time. But as we get up, as we grow up as humans, we're trained to shut that down and not to shake it off. And if your nervous system doesn't shake it off, well, then it gets stored, right? So
It's
um,
funny because we have even the same when something's going on, just shake it off,
right,
right?
right, shake it off, right. Well, we should really do that. You know, we should
Interesting.
learn how to do that every day, is to shake it off. So for people who are interested, going to there's a website called traumaprevention.com, where you can learn about shaking it off. These
Hmm.
traumatic release exercises. They use it a lot in the military, globally, use it specifically for PTSD and other kinds of trauma. I've gone through a couple of classes myself. It's really amazing to learn how to do it. It's a great skill to have. And you can teach anyone how to do it. You know, little kids can do it. Um, anyone of any age or any kind, you know, with any sort of physical impairments, can find a way to use the body to kind of shake that off. It's just a matter of learning how to do it.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah. Another thing I like to have people try is called tapping.
I've heard
That's an
about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it uses acupuncture points, and you tap like on certain areas of the body like this, you know. Um, that not only do all the points that they use have a very specific psychoenergetic application in terms of, you know, the acupuncture points, they're very spiritual points, um, but it's a way of managing energy flow and clearing energy stagnation, kind of like what Qigong does, right? But it is also a way of releasing things from the body, and you don't even really have to know what they are. You don't have to have an awareness of the trauma or what you're trying to release. The body has the wisdom, and it can kind of take care of that for you. So tapping is also really easy to learn, and you can do it anytime, anywhere. It's a great tool to learn how to use.
At the end of the day, some of these things that we just mentioned, tapping, acupuncture, qigong, then also yoga,
Yeah.
acupressure, they basically work on the same principles, isn't it?
Yeah.
Letting the energy flow, making
Hmm.
sure it's not stagnant. It's just the right amount of energy flowing through a certain meridian or uh,
Yeah.
point.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And in Chinese medicine, you know, stagnation or energy depletion is kind of the
Hmm.
root of all illness, depending on where it
Yeah.
happens in the body, right? So manage your energy, your body will take care of itself.
There's one supplement that just came to my mind. I actually
Hmm.
just bought it very recently. It was one that you've heard about or used it before. It's Triphala.
Oh,
You,
yeah. That's an
yeah, yeah.
Ayurvedic supplement. Yeah. Yeah. Really good for the gut.
Hmm.
I think that's three different fruits,
Yes,
Ayurvedic fruits combined together. It's a very classic Ayurvedic formula
yeah. Tastes
for
horrible,
gut
but
health. That's most of this stuff does,
yeah,
right?
true.
Yeah. Good. So you're taking that?
Yeah,
Good.
I've used it quite a few times because, yeah, like I said, when I started studying about Qigong and all these other things, I would read books about them. I had two interesting books about Ayurveda. So it's
Yeah.
just interesting what it is and how it works and everything. And obviously, it was mentioned there. So I think usually the way you use it for like 3 months or so, then you take a break from it.
Hmm.
Just have a, like a half a teaspoon or teaspoon in the morning.
Yeah.
I used to make a tea out of it, which is like so like one of the worst tastes I ever tasted. Like it's pretty bad. Now I'm just putting it just into water, no hot water, just normal
Yeah.
lukewarm
Yeah.
cold water, and that's kind of more bearable. And it does make you feel pretty good when I have it, to be honest, in the morning.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah,
So you're doing it for a few months and then taking a break?
yeah. I only
Yeah.
did for like
Yeah.
a week or two ago.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a great idea.
yeah. It also detoxifies your body and
Yep.
everything. Lots of antioxidants. So
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. And, I mean, if you're paying attention as you are, to gut health, and then I think just as important is liver health. If you can
Mhm.
really optimize those two organ functions, it will transform your entire, landscape through your body. I mean, it really has far-reaching health benefits just focusing on liver and the gut.
Mhm. So what tips do you have for the liver specifically?
Yeah. Well, you can do like general liver tonics. There are a lot of herbs like burdock root, milk thistle, things like that, dandelion. And you'll find those like if you go to the store and you get, a daily detox tea or a liver cleanse tea, you'll find herbs like that in it. And I think those are good to drink every day because our livers in this modern world, our livers, everyone's liver could use a little support, no matter who you are, no matter what you have going on. But when it comes to autoimmune disease, it's different. You need to kind of ratchet up that support quite a bit. So I usually tell people to take liposomal glutathione. Definitely take a lot of milk thistle and sometimes a little bit of dim, and other herbs, and a binder. Doing some really active detoxification work where you are promoting bile flow. You're taking herbs like really strong bitter herbs as part of that. You're taking herbs to increase bile production and increase bile flow because we move so much of our toxic load through the bile. When you do that, then particularly on an empty stomach, right? Then you get this big bile dump into the small intestine. Well, now you have a big toxin dump into the small intestine. So we don't want that to just like be able to go anywhere, right? We want to keep it in the intestines and move it into the stool. So for that to ensure that, always follow that up with a binder. So a binder every day, when you're actively trying to detoxify the liver is a really good idea because if you don't do that, then you can end up recirculating toxins that have already gone through the liver once. And when they go back for a second pass, they're actually more concentrated and harder for the liver to deal with the second time around.
Mhm. What kind of binder are we talking about?
Yeah, so charcoal is a very common binder. So charcoal and clay, bentonite clay, most people are familiar with. And there are other binders. I like a formula called the Ultra Binder. It's made by Quicksilver Scientific. Another one is called GI Detox, made by Biobotanical Research. These are combination binders. They use several different binding components together to give you, because each binder has weak specificity and strong specificity for different toxins. So if you use a binding formula that has different binders in it, you're going to be optimizing the amount of toxins that you can actually collect with that binder. If you just do the charcoal, you're only going to get the toxins that charcoal has a strong
Mhm.
specificity for, right? So you want to kind of maximize the amount of toxins that you can bind up. So that's why those formulas are really the best way to go, I think.
Mhm. Just came to my mind. I guess zeolite is one of them as well,
Zeolite,
isn't it?
yep.
Yeah,
Zeolite, chitosan, yep,
yeah. I used that one
definitely.
before.
Silica,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm. Interesting. Good to know. So I suppose they also help with heavy metal toxicity, don't they?
Yes. Yeah, and we move a lot of metals through the bile.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, and really everything kind of makes its way to the liver eventually, right? And goes through. The liver is the workhorse of the body. It's how we process everything, and that's our detoxification organ. So yeah, metals, you got to bind them up to get them out of the body, and minerals do that. Just the minerals in our body act as binders for various things that we're exposed to. But if you're mineral deficient, which a lot of people are, then you've kind of lost your natural binding capacity. So part of getting yourself healthier is often remineralizing your body, making sure that you're addressing those underlying nutrient deficiencies that are there.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is really great info, to be honest. Like, again, this is one of the type of podcasts where I'm also learning a lot, and it's very interesting that since I started this podcast, probably 1 in 3,
Uh-huh.
roughly, guests, you know, there's certain things that I have on my mind which I wanted to look into or, learn more about, or some kind of problem that I have, and like as I said, 1 in 3 are exactly those people who have this knowledge,
Yeah.
which is someone. And it's not like I'm asked specifically, like in your case, in the post on Facebook, which you saw. I never mentioned autoimmune diseases or something, but suddenly, you and other people just somehow can come here and I get the answers that I need. So that's pretty good. I'm pretty
Yeah,
happy
it's
about it.
great. That's
Yeah,
great. Yeah.
because to be honest, I also have well, probably 2 issues. I would say the first one, like I think it started when I was a kid. I think I was 9 or so. If I remember exactly what happened correctly, my dad got attacked by a neighbor, and
Oh
I saw
gosh.
saw that happen. Uh, he just got smacked on his face and lost consciousness for a moment in our flat. I saw that. I think a month later or so, I ended up in the hospital um, because I had like suddenly had rashes and that kind of stuff.
Mm,
And the doctors, they were pretty freaking useless over there. I ended up being there for a month, and sometimes they're like, "Yeah, it might be psoriasis, parapsoriasis, or this other thing." So they didn't really know. They tried different,
yeah.
treatments. Sometimes I would wake up and have like a pretty bad rash on my chest, and yeah, they didn't help at all. Like I still have a bit of problems with my skin, and
Hmm.
interesting enough, the parts of my skin which get enough sunlight in spring, summer, autumn, to some extent. So like the top of my arms, my face, upper body, that's just fine.
Yeah.
My skin is not dry. Bear in mind that it's not like some super hardcore issues. Like I have a friend who has psoriasis and his skin is peeling off even on his palms, and he's got
Oh,
arthritis because of that too.
yeah.
So mine is like very mild compared to that.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't change much, and it's just a bit of dry skin, patches which are a bit more reddish, and that's it. And like I said, it doesn't change or anything. And somehow, I don't know whether it's some subconsciously or what is going on. Some of the things you told about,
Hmm.
like obviously eating healthy, some of the detox stuff, like the Triphala that I'm taking, the
Yeah.
zeolite that I have. Somehow, I'm kind of drawn to that. So
Yeah. Well, what interests me about your story is that that happened after you experienced a trauma,
yeah,
because the violence you witnessed as, and it doesn't have to be extraordinarily violent, but as a child to,
well, it was pretty terrifying in that moment, I guess.
of course, that goes right at the core of your safety,
Hmm.
right? Because that's what your parents represent for you. That's the safe, well, I mean, we hope, that's the safe place. But Yeah, just seeing one violent event like that as a child, that could have been that thing that set off that skin issue. That could have
Hmm.
been the way that your body recorded that trauma.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, and here I am more than 20 years later, I still got that thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Maybe,
amazing. It's amazing how much the body records and holds on to.
yeah.
It's really the tapestry of our entire life.
Hmm. There's definitely something to it. Even
Mhm.
though just recently, I can't remember what the video was about, but I heard someone say that this notion that the body stores, like we were saying, certain energies or memories, it's
Yeah.
not scientific. There's no evidence for it. But at least,
Yeah. Well, um, maybe yet, right?
yeah,
But that's it's like, people trying to figure out, well, where is consciousness? Where is it in the body?
yeah,
Right? Where is the soul in the body? Well, we don't have to have consciousness proved to us to know that we have it, right? So I don't know, some things, when people say, well, there's no scientific proof, it's like, yeah, well, you know it when you know it, right? And I don't think it's a huge leap of faith to say that what we experience emotionally and psychically has an impact on the body, because there are plenty of studies out there that will tell us that stress is the number one cause of all disease.
yeah,
Okay, well then, I guess that's pretty scientific. you know, if they're coming out and saying that, right, then obviously these things are very, very connected. And I read a paper, it was a few years ago, talking about that memory. We think of memories being in the brain, which they are, but that actually memories may be at the level of the cell, and that all cells communicate with each other. So, really, your memories are everywhere. They're not just in your head, even though that's where we retrieve them. All the cells in your body have access to that information, which I found a pretty interesting idea, think of it that
yeah,
way. And in Chinese medicine, it makes sense, because Chinese medicine tells you that every organ has its own energetic frequency. So there's a different qi in the liver than there is in the spleen or in the lung, but these organs all work together and they communicate together, and they have access to each other's information, right? So 2000 years ago, they're talking about how this energy is pervasive and it really goes everywhere, and it's matter that follows energy, right? And now we're still having that conversation, in modern science. It's pretty interesting.
definitely is. And we have a lot to learn from either
Yeah.
traditional Chinese medicine or
Yeah.
Ayurveda. And when it comes to what I was saying about this lady saying there's no scientific evidence for it, I think statements like this, like these, what it comes down to mainly is people don't really know what science is and how it works.
Right.
Like these days, trust the
That's right.
science, dude. It's not a religion.
Yeah.
Know,
Yeah.
if you want to do science, you need to question it. And just because science didn't figure out something yet, it doesn't mean it won't figure out in the future, right?
Hmm.
We saw it throughout the entire history.
That's
Like,
right.
I mean, science, the establishment would resist certain ideas so freaking much. Like even just something simple as falling stars, meteorites.
Hmm.
The establishment was like, how that's absolutely impossible. There will be rocks falling down from sky. There are no rocks in the heavens. I mean,
Right.
yeah. And it seems
Yeah.
like most people haven't learned anything yet. It was, even despite hundreds of years of history. But yeah, um, I forgot what I want to say. Never mind. Might come back to me. Super interesting stuff. This.
Well, yeah, and getting back to what you're saying about no scientific evidence, you think about Chinese medicine for 2,000 years. I mean, they didn't have scientific evidence of anything they were doing with herbal formulas, and they didn't have any way of verifying the meridians. They couldn't cut someone open and see them, right? But they're there. They knew it was, so it's like just the thousands of years of medicine is the scientific evidence. The fact that these things work,
Yeah.
right, is the evidence.
Well, it's probably definitely more than 2,000 years. I mean,
Yeah.
even Ayurveda, it goes back to 5,000 years.
Yeah.
Probably even more than that.
Yeah.
And came to me what I wanted to say. There's a lot to learn from, as I said, from previous cultures and from past, and even like the chakra system. You
Yes.
got 7
Yeah.
chakras.
That's right.
So a lot of people will say that's absolute nonsense. Energy centers and all that stuff. But I for example, I really like doing the 5 or well, there's actually a 6 one, the 6 Tibetans. Right? Basically, for those who don't know, it's a form of yoga, just 6 very simple exercises, and it actually comes from Tibet. So when you do them, one of the main reason why it has a good effect on a human body and mind as well is because it aligns all the chakras. Now,
Right.
what are the chakras? Well, they say they are psycho-energetic centers. Each of them has a certain emotion, color associated to it, energy, and they are correlated actually with the endocrine system.
Yep.
So you got one energy center which correlates with the adrenal glands, other one with the thyroid, and you got the pituitary gland.
Yeah.
And now, if you think about it, now it starts to make sense because all these glands, they produce different hormones, which
That's right.
then they regulate the certain functions in the body as well as
Yep.
our mental states.
Yep.
So now we see that what we thought was voodoo or some absolute nonsense someone made up over there, some savages or something, which used to be the notion that the Europeans had about traditional Chinese medicine or Indian medicine or what have you.
Yeah.
Now we're figuring out, thanks to what we found out in the West with science, that actually they were right.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And along with the chakras, even in Chinese medicine, there's no chakras, but there's an organ called the sanjiao,
Yeah.
the triple burner. And so it's basically the whole abdominal area, right? And so you have the lower burner, the middle burner, and the upper burner. And then you have governing vessels that go through, so extraordinary vessels. You have the governing vessel and the conception vessel, and the Chong, and those go through all of those. So it's very similar in terms of that philosophy of alignment, right? And if you manage that alignment, then that balances the body. It's just interesting how these two cultures, vastly different forms of medicine, but there is some similarity in how they're structured.
Yeah.
It's very
And
cool.
what you just mentioned, the 3 fires,
Yeah.
it does correlate with 3 of the chakras, doesn't it? You got one
Yeah, it
here,
does.
it's the
It
upper
does.
Dantian. Then you got the
That's
one
right.
here, middle
Middle
Dantian, which is the
Dantian
heart chakra.
and
And
the
then you
lower
got the
Dantian.
lower Dantian, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is another
Yes, absolutely.
it's another chakra there. So, and yeah, for those who kind of lost it over with what we were saying, the 8 extraordinary, how do you call them?
Extraordinary vessels.
Vessels, yeah. There's different ways of calling them. Those are the ones who store energy and supply them to the brain, and then through that they go into the organs as well. Then you got the 12 other meridians, which each one of them is connected with one inner organ.
Yeah. And they pass through the extraordinary vessels.
Yeah.
Yeah. They line up with them. They connect. They pass through. Yeah.
Yeah, these 12, they go into extremities, like
Mm-hmm.
all the way to arms and legs,
Yep.
fingers. But the extraordinary ones, they only go to the legs. You know, when it comes to the extremities, they don't go into the arms.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then there's low vessels that are
Yeah, the
like
very small ones, like
that
millions of
they
them
run
going.
everywhere.
Yeah.
The way that I think about them is the extraordinary vessels are like the deep sea, right? And the meridians are the rivers, right?
Hmm.
And then the low vessels are just these little creeks and tributaries that run
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah, they
You know,
go into a skin and bone marrow.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah, it's a good way of saying
through
it.
all the fascia, right?
Hmm.
They're through all the fascia.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing that ancient doctors were able to intuit this because, like we said, they had no way of verifying,
Yeah.
but they intuited this wisdom, and it holds true today. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I was thinking about it quite a lot. Like, how did they manage to figure this out?
I know.
Like, obviously, they were really good at meditation. You can't deny that. Whether it
Sure,
was in India, China, Tibet,
sure,
whatever, Japan, that might be one way,
sure.
perhaps. Then there was even uh, basically, what was it Hartwig Hausdorff? He used to he learned a lot of things from Erich von Däniken. Those of you who are into aliens and that kind of stuff probably know these names, but they were both Erich von Däniken and Hausdorff. They were proponents of the ancient alien theory,
Right.
saying that in the past some kind of extraterrestrial life came to Earth, and that's why we got myths of the creation, and there were some gods that came from the sky and taught people things.
Sure.
So Hausdorff, his work is quite interesting, to be honest, because he looks at a lot of the quite mysterious stuff that's in the East. Because Erich von Däniken will talk about South America, North America, um, you know, Easter Island, what have you. But Hausdorff focuses more on the East,
Hmm.
because for example, in China you have also pyramids, which are
Right.
pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So his suggestion was that the ancient Chinese, and ancient I mean like more than 4,000 years before, in the times of the very first myth, not legendary emperors, like way long ago, that they got this knowledge from some kind of a more advanced civilization. Who knows? Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perhaps because because of the use of all these mushrooms that, like I say, even just for food, even, like in China, they
Hmm.
use like thousands of different types of mushrooms compared to the West, where you have like maybe, I don't know, five of them in a supermarket.
Right.
Big difference. And some of them are definitely psychedelic. So
Oh yeah. Yeah.
perhaps that's another way that
That's
we
another
may have,
way.
yeah,
Hmm.
they managed to figure these things out, because it does seem like they truly work. And even from my experience with Qigong,
Oh yeah.
whether it was um, internal Qigong using the small heavenly circuit, or trying to push it into the hands,
Right.
you can actually feel that stuff. Obviously,
Yeah, you can.
different people will have different experiences of, but can't deny that. I must say they really works, and even things like sexual kung fu, like the ones what's his name, Mantak Chia talks about in his books. I mean, that's so powerful, and it really works. It's really remarkable.
Well, yeah, yeah, just getting an acupuncture treatment, it's it's pretty clear that it works,
Hmm.
right? I mean, the fact that someone can lay down in a chair, like I do community acupuncture, so it's all these like easy chairs in a big common space, and but someone can walk into the clinic and have 9 and 10 level pain and they walk out and they're pain-free. Well, people say, "Oh, that's the placebo effect." Well, yeah, but most people don't even believe. And that's the thing. People will ask, "Do I have to believe in this in order for it to work?" It's like, no, it works no matter what. But I'm constantly just re-amazed over and over again at the power of acupuncture. To me, it's just amazing.
Yeah. I had a client as well. He, like you say, he didn't believe in it or anything.
Yeah.
He just went there. And actually, it might have been not an acupuncturist, but a physiotherapist who knew some acupuncture, if I remember right. Anyway, he got this acupuncture treatment and he was like, "Man, it actually helped."
Yeah.
So definitely, in his case, definitely wasn't placebo. And if
Right.
someone else goes and it is placebo, well, it doesn't matter that much, really. I mean, you got better.
Does it matter? No.
Yeah.
No. And particularly since they've done a study on antidepressants. I forget the SSRIs.
Yeah.
That they're no more effective than the placebo.
Yeah, I've heard about
Okay,
that.
so then why does it matter if something's works because of the placebo or it works because of some other reason, right? Let's use the placebo to our benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I like about Joe Dispenza's work. I'm sure you know
Yes.
him.
I
Yeah.
love Joe Dispenza. Yeah. Yeah.
He kind of explains how this placebo works
Yep.
and how to use it to your benefit.
That's right. Yeah.
So I highly recommend that.
Yeah, I do too. And the workshops are great. I've been to a couple of his workshops, and yeah, and the books are great. I think everyone should at least get some awareness of his work.
Yeah,
Super
definitely.
powerful. Hmm.
Great. Well, this was an amazing conversation.
Yeah, I had fun, Elvis. Thank you.
Yeah. So before we finish, as always, I ask 3 questions to each one of my guests.
Uh-oh. Okay. Put me on the spot.
For the listeners, you can find all the answers for each one of my guests in separate playlists. So, first question: if there was one advice you could give to people, what would it be?
Eliminate gluten forever. Yep.
Okay. Anything else?
No, I think that's the most important thing you can do for your health that you
Mhm.
have control over, to eliminate gluten for everyone. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Now, second question: what does femininity mean to you?
Hmm. Interesting. Um, I would have to say that oh, it's changing for me, and I think in a good way, because it's changing in our culture, that we're not so married to the idea of a masculine and feminine, a very specific, diametrically opposed masculine and feminine. Um, but if I had to say, I'd say it to me it's yin. To me it's yin, masculine is yang. And I think that's a perfect representation, because if you look at the yin yang symbol, right, they flow into each other. And there is the kernel of yang within the yin and the kernel of yin within the yang. Um, so there really is no separation between the two. It's just a natural flow of one into the other. And that the feminine without the masculine is not possible, and vice versa. Right? So, if that does that answer your question?
Yeah, I like that answer.
Okay.
I do think that people should learn definitely more about the Taoism and the
Hmm.
principle of yin yang. It
Yeah.
would, I think, make life a bit easier,
Yeah.
make more sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
more
Absolutely.
sense. Yeah, and when yin and yang are in balance, that's when beautiful new things can arise.
That's right.
Right. Right. Last question: what do you think is the meaning of life?
Oh, wow. The meaning of life. I think to be in a state of joy, to be present and be in joy, I guess I would say that's the purpose of life. Joy. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, again, it was a great pleasure talking to you. I think we
Yeah,
got
you too, Elvis.
podcast full of good information. Right?
Yeah. Well,
And
thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
okay, one last thing, where can people
Yeah.
find you?
My website is morgannutrition.com. And you can find me on Instagram or Facebook at Whitney Morgan Nutrition. Same place for both of them.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, you're
And
welcome.
to our listeners, thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for having me. Take care.